Okay, testing. Yeah, looks good.
Looks good.
Cool. This is Jessica Wells, and I'm with Tim Davies, and we're just going to have a bit of a chat about arranging in today's times and the experiences Tim has had with various jobs that he's done recently. So, Tim.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Good to be here working with you.
Yes, it's been amazing. Fantastic.
But we can talk about that a little bit later, maybe. But yeah, I just thought it'd be good today to talk about like what, if you're an arranger right now in 2000 and whatever year it is, 2020, scary. What does that mean? I mean, it used to be that you would do big band arrangements for singers and that sort of stuff. I mean, I started doing a bit of that. I started doing arrangements for high schools, and that sort of still happens. And then obviously the Christmas carols gigs at the end of the years, that still happens. And that has a particular style to it. Mm-hmm. But what I've found myself the busiest at is writing for orchestras for pops shows, but in particular with hip hop and R&B acts, which is, I don't know how the guy from Brisbane ends up doing that in America, but or the girl from Brooklyn ends up conducting in Sydney. But it's a big wonderful world.
Absolutely.
So I've just found that the sort of the requirements of the arranger have also changed over the years. Mm-hmm. Whereas once upon a time you used to just get the phone call and you negotiated your money and you sent a score. And then it became you had to send the parts as well.
Yes.
Like
with no extra cash.
No extra cash. Yeah, you used to. I think I started, my first sort of paid gigs were the early 90s as I was finishing university or in the middle of university, and there was still some sort of, if the established guys like Alan Slater, who was a great arranger who taught me for a little bit in Queensland, he would still get money to have his stuff copied. But when I started, it was they might throw in an extra $100 if you're lucky, and then now I can say in the the professional world, from what my work is, I mean, I write regularly for the orchestras in America. I write a lot for the BBC, the Metropole Orchestra in the Netherlands, and all of them, they don't even mention that. It's you get your fee, and that's it. That includes you sending the parts. The other thing that's changed in the last 10 years, I guess, is the demo.
They need to hear something.
You never had to send the demo before.
No, you just sent the score.
The score.
Prayed that's what they wanted.
Then you sent the score and the parts. And now there's the demo. And that's a double-edged sword, because sometimes they hear it and they're blown away and it's all great. Then sometimes they hear it and they just might want changes, or they just don't like something. Or, I mean, I haven't had it happen where they haven't liked anything. It's usually just been fine. But I know once you start, giving people the options to change things, they're going to. And usually the money that they're paying you for an arrangement is not enough to spend an extra couple of days redoing things. Yes. It's like your first impression and idea is that's the budget is gone. So it's scary, but it is sort of the accepted behavior now.
Right.
Like when I work for the Metropole, they don't change anything, but either Jules Buckley, who's the artistic director there, he'll want to hear it just to get an idea, or the artist will want to hear it. They do a lot of really cool projects with interesting artists, and they always want to hear it. But I've never had to make a change based on that, but I still have to do it. And then of course it's like, well, how far do you go? Do you just do the note performer?
Yes, I was going to ask.
Version?
Technically, what sort of demo are you happy to give to them? Is it just to play out with samples from the notation software, or do you go full hog and go into the DAW and sample it all out? You don't usually have time for that.
It depends who I'm sending it to. So when I'm sending it just to Jules, who knows, he does it himself. So he knows that playback from Note Performer is not. And they're looking at
the score as well.
Yeah.
And they make that leap of imagination.
But the other problem too is like rhythm sections. I mean, I don't program a rhythm section when I'm notating. No. I mean, it's slashes for the drums and
your hip hop beat's not in there.
It's not in there. So one trick I can usually do on the hip hop stuff is actually lay the orchestra over the original.
Yeah, right.
Because this stuff usually doesn't have orchestra in it. And so what I'm doing is adding or I can turn it down, or I can do some tricky EQing. You know, when I did the job, so the first sort of big hip hop thing I did, which sort of got me started in that world, was for Nas when we did the 20th anniversary of Illmatic at the Kennedy Center in 2014, I think it was, and for that, they, you know, it was my first job with them, and it's such a big thing that they wanted the demos. So I actually went full on.
You did the demos.
I did the proper demos. So I took the MIDI file from Finale, put it into Cubase, and programmed it like I would if I was
time.
Yeah, if I was writing a movie score, you know, with that kind of quality, and did the best I could. And for that, I actually, I laid in the orchestra over his original tracks, because mainly they were loops and beds, and it was fine. I did find one song where I found his naked vocal.
Oh, and you could layer that, over the
top. I could do my whole version, and for that one, it actually led me down a different road, because I really went to town and did a completely different version of it.
Ah, cool.
Which was interesting, because I sent all the demo off. This is the only time I had to change an arrangement, actually, because I sent it off, got word that everyone was happy, everyone had listened to it and everything. So I had the parts done and showed up to the rehearsal. They're awesome out there. They actually fly me in across the country for the rehearsals for all these shows. I've done like 6 shows with them now, I think. And I've conducted occasionally, but normally their regular conductor, Stephen Reinecke, who's their pops guy, does it. And but I get to go and see the orchestra and hear the arrangements and work out what I did right or wrong and all that. I rarely make changes, but I just make note for next time. Like notation wise, what did I do? What dynamics did I keep changing and what didn't work? I mean, pizzicato in a pops gig is like just pointless. You know, bassoons on a pops gig. I mean, give them the night off. But anyway, so this one, Life's a Bitch, is the song. And so I did this very, very different version, thinking that it had been all approved and he'd heard it. We showed up, and of course he hadn't heard it at all.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So it kind of like crashed and burned.
Oh, right. Okay.
But no one was angry. It was just like, I just said, let me fix it.
It's not the right vibe.
Well, I actually knew the last section of it was actually his bed. So I just kind of rearranged the chart that night in my hotel. Yep. And so he could do his rapping over the what was the last section of my chart, which was actually the loop, and he could rap over that, and then we did an orchestral interlude every now and then, which was what I wanted him to rap over originally. I repurposed the arrangement and saved it, and it was fine. There was no issues. Most people wouldn't even remember that. But when we had this sort of slowdown and everyone had a little spare time, I went back and revisited that arrangement and redid the demo again, because now it's like 5 years since that first time, and I've got a lot more new samples and I can program better. So redid it and produced it to something, and I'm going to put it out there as like, my kind of reimagining of Nas if he didn't have the track.
Yes.
And it was just him, because I've got his stripped back, just the vocal that I found. So that's been an interesting thing, and I'm working on a big blog post about it where I'll talk about the arrangement and my ideas and how I did it and how I notated, just sort of dissecting the whole thing. I'm sort of like, I got halfway through it and then things picked up again, so I haven't finished
revisit it and finish it off.
Yeah. But so on that job, I did do the full-on demos. And because the people that were listening to it, I knew didn't have the... that's a bad word, the imagination, but the knowledge to just go, well, that's shitty note performer playback.
You make that leap of faith to know what the orchestra will sound like.
Yeah. So, but normally when someone else asks for the demo, it's like, oh no, can of worms. Because when I'm working, I don't use note performer when I'm working because there's always a lag.
Yes.
And it relies on too much information. And my problem is, if anyone's read any of my crap online, I'm a minimalist, so I put the minimum dynamic articulation in there. It's a sport for me to not clutter the page. Well, that means when the notation program tries to play it, it doesn't know what to do because I'm relying on a human. So I nearly always have to do a second version of the score and put in a lot of the other stuff that most people would have put in anyway. But when I'm working, I have a playback template just in the background from Finale. In a program called Plug Bijou, which is just a hosting program. and I use it's the Wallander Weavy for the brass and the woods, and just Garriton strings, the crappy ones, GPO, whatever. Yeah. Because all I want is on off, and it doesn't read any.
It's got to be fast when you're working.
Yeah, when I'm working, and it doesn't load ever. Like I hate it when I'm at a session and I open a file and you click the wrong thing, and all of a sudden you see these windows pop up as it's trying to open something, and it's like, no, I just want to check if I put the wrong note. So when I work, that's my playback, and it sounds okay. And if I layer that over the demo, over the original file, then that kind of works.
Yeah.
I just last week or week before did a job for Houston Symphony for their 4th of July concert, and it was a rapper called Trey the Truth, and I did 3 of his tracks.
Terrific.
And I actually, for the demo, because they wanted the demo, I did exactly that. I just took that playback from Plogue, printed it, and then laid it over his original track, and then did a little EQing. And
then just sent that back mixed
and
off
I sent
to
that.
them,
I sent that,
and that it basically for what they needed
that worked,
to hear.
Yeah. So, I've done that for Jules and the Metropole. I usually do the note performer one, but that involves making a second score
with little details
and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, I check out other people's demos like that every now and then, and sometimes you're just blown away, and then other times you're like, wow, like, whoa, you're working. I'm spending way too much time on my stuff.
Right.
But on the, I mean, that's just part of the gig, is that's the requirements, What I've found from doing, all of this, I mean, there's a ton of bad pops arranging out there, and I think there's the Christmas Carol style, which is great. I mean, that's flowery, right? That's a lot of woodwinds, and that's harp runs and sleigh bells and, suspended cymbal rolls. And, it's that kind of larger than life thing. But if you think about in the hip hop world and in the pop string world, like, they don't use flutes in the sessions originally. It's pop strings.
Yeah.
Is, generally a pretty small string section. And there is not, all of this other fluff in there. Yeah. So you have to ask yourself, well, is it needed? When I'm doing a pop show with a hip hop artist, it really sort of takes the edge off their music if you have flowery flutes everywhere. Flourishes. You don't need it. Yeah. So you have to really think about how you approach it. And what I do is, I always find my places. So you do an introduction.
Yeah, so the orchestral introduction before the beat comes in.
Exactly.
Then you have your time to play.
Yeah, because also the other thing is, when the beat's going, and if you've got a live rhythm section or whatever, which is another thing we should talk about because I've done a lot of shows with that. They're going to wipe out the bassoons and the oboe and all that.
I did a show once where we just decided to give the bassoon a solo in one song because that's the only time they got heard in the whole show. It was a David Bowie tribute show. Yeah. So we just gave the bassoon a solo for the first 8 bars of the song so that they could actually be heard somewhere in the show.
Yeah. They could feel good. They can Instagram that one. But so I really find it's important I don't want the music to be sacrificed. Okay, I don't believe in this whole thing. Some people believe in that, especially in the professional world, it's not like a high school band where you have to give everyone something to play.
That's right, yeah.
The music is the important thing. Yeah. The music is the important thing. If I don't need the flutes in a song, I'm just not going to use the flutes. They can sit there, they can go and have a cup of tea. They're not really going to be upset. Now, maybe they'll be upset if you badly write for them in a really loud song and they're in their low range and they'll never be heard. That's a separate problem with your arranging skills, not with, that's a different thing. But I'm quite happy just to have the flutes play in 4 bars at the beginning and then tacit the rest.
So it's using the instruments appropriately for the song where they actually shine.
Exactly. And sometimes there's just no place for the bassoon, and I've definitely done shows. I think when we did the Kendrick Lamar show, I'm just like, just give the bassoons the night off.
Yeah, and and it's fair enough because you're just going to not use the color.
I mean, the other, the trap that I see a lot of young film orchestrators fall into and arrangers is thinking that the bassoon is a bass instrument, so it has to play with the cellos the entire thing. Like, if you've ever actually heard a bassoon trying to play like a jump, 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 jump riff with the cellos, it's not a really good sound. Yeah. It works for the online Zoom video of the 8 bassoons playing something, But when you're trying to come up with a palette of sounds that matches the action on the screen or the hip hop beats and all of that, you've got some grit and bite in the cellos. The bassoon's a different sound. Save it for the introduction or the melody when it mixes and blends into a beautiful sound. But it is not an instrument to go bap, 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 bap.
No, it's not going to add any bite to the strings.
It's never going to be heard. It sounds pretty bad. And the other thing is to, usually in those situations, especially if it's like splatty stuff, there's going to be brass with it.
Yeah.
And they're going to win.
Yeah.
So even in film scores, I tend to leave them out a lot, unless it's just like a big full twitty symphonic hit. But if it's like a riffy, a lot of video game music, has that driving rock band orchestra kind of vibe. And it's just leave it out.
Yeah.
But so back to the hip hop thing, I find really thinking about how the orchestra works with the artist and what is going to help their music without thinking that I just have to use the orchestra.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is, write the interlude, write the big introduction. The artists love that. They love hearing snippets of their theme or their music as an introduction. When we did Kendrick Lamar, I put together a whole overture.
Wow.
Of bits.
Of his themes.
And I mean, all his tracks basically have loops and little hooks.
Yeah.
And I just took them and put an introduction on it and linked them all together. But when we played them, the crowd went nuts because they recognized
really
that, Be Alright.
Yeah.
There's these big chords. It's a sample that just keeps going. And we played that with the orchestra isolated, and the crowd just screamed, and the orchestra gets spun out when they hear a screaming
cheering
crowds.
Yeah.
But the other big thing, with these hip hop and pops gigs is the rhythm section is a huge problem. I've seen so many shows where it's been a pointless waste of an orchestra when they're wiped out.
Not a backing band for
by drums and bass.
The rhythm section.
Yeah. And if you're doing a loud show like that, you should write to it. So there's no point having the double basses from the orchestra playing the whole time double. We've got electric bass. Just leave them out. That's why on pop strings albums, you don't have basses most of the time.
Nope.
Not needed. So it's pointless to have them doing that. Again, find a place where
they can shine on their own. Yeah.
And that's where it's important to work with artists that appreciate, and I've been lucky with the stuff at the Kennedy Center, is the artists appreciate that it's a collaboration with the orchestra. And that we're doing new versions of their music.
Yeah,
they're not just going to show up and do their thing. So there'll be places where I tell their rhythm section to lay out.
Yeah, do you often do that and say, let's do like a ballad version of something?
Exactly.
And have the rhythm section stay out of it. And that gives them something really new and interesting for the audience too. That they're not just hearing the album that they've been listening to 17,000 times with an orchestra stuck on the back of it. It's new ideas and new ways of listening to those songs.
But you need a confident artist to do that. Yes. Not all of them are going to be able to do it. I did I did Babyface. All those big 80s power ballads and all that sort of stuff, 90s, and I asked him if on a couple of them I could just use him and the orchestra. And he played guitar in the rehearsal, and I even asked him if he could just sing. Sing. And he sort of sat there with the guitar. He gave the odd strum, to feel comfortable. He's also really weird to watch because he's a lefty but plays a regular strung guitar.
Oh, right, okay.
I had to do a big double take in the rehearsal.
Jimi Hendrix style.
Because I saw him pick up. I knew Nomad, his guitarist, was right-handed, and then I just saw him pick up his guitar, and then I looked and he was playing it, but he's a lefty, and I spun my head out. Yep. But anyway, so I got to go on a bit of a journey with his stuff. I had an idea in the shower because he produced an album with James Taylor, and they did Fire and Rain.
Oh.
And he does that in his live show, and it's an awesome version. But I just had in my head Firebird and Rain.
Oh.
So I wanted to do a mashup of the Firebird and Fire and Rain.
Those woodwinds going to work out.
And I talked to him about it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, okay."
Do they know what it was?
So, and I sent him, the crappy demo and everything, and I don't think he listened to it. So we were at the rehearsal in LA, not with the orchestra, but just running through the forms with him. And he's like listening. We played it to him. He's like, oh, okay. And I still wasn't sure, how it was going to go. But we got there with the orchestra.
Yeah.
And it was fine. I mean, he did it. And I had the horn solo at the start, like in the original. Yeah. And then he's actually had a really big ending on it already. And my one of my co-workers, Jeremy Levy, that was proofreading the score for me before I finished it, he's like, where's the ending? And I'm like, well, it's got a big ending already. And he's like, no, you got to put the ending on. So then I did. So I did it, except we did it in C. Oh. Because that was what key was in, because the original was like in B. So the horn did the solo in the wrong key at the beginning, and it worked really well.
Oh, wow.
So sometimes you win, sometimes, like I guess the Naz one where I had to backtrack a little bit.
To be more on there.
But I also find it's important in a concert like that to come up with a balance. So for every one I get to make them really think, you need to let them do 3 maybe.
Which they're in their zone.
They're in their zone.
Yeah.
And you need to let them do 1 or 2 where you really do just let them do their normal live thing. Yeah. Like he had a couple of medleys where he took his shirt off and ran around and the women were screaming. And there was no point trying to reinvent that. It wasn't going to work. No. It needed the energy of the band,
Yeah, for sure.
But we've also done a lot of work, especially at the Kennedy Center, where we've done like 5 or 6 of these shows, because the orchestra, hate the noise. I mean, orchestras in America, I'm not sure if it's so much so here, but they've started just getting up and leaving.
Ooh.
If it's getting too loud, certain players will just say, well, this is over the decibels by our contract.
Yeah, they're set up behind the band because...
But even then the stages are rumbling and all that.
And then you've got perspex around the drummer or something
but by the time you do that, you've now walled off the orchestra and it's not a collaboration anymore.
Then it becomes a different
a different thing, which is what they sort of do at the Hollywood Bowl a lot. And that's where, they do some fantastic stuff there, but I've also seen some stuff... I mean, I saw Weird Al Yankovic.
Oh, yeah, right.
I love him. It was a great show, but it didn't need an orchestra at all. Okay. It was just a waste. You couldn't even see them because his band was there, and then
they're at the front, the orchestra's up the back.
Yeah.
Backing band.
So we like to have it. What we've found that works and keeps the orchestra at least happy, and they don't walk off, is you try and keep it to an acoustic bass, and then just a little amp. The drums, you try to have them play with brushes or blast sticks. Because, in a concert hall, too, the minute you play sticks on a hi-hat, it just it goes around. And it also starts to come from a different place in the room. So
and the distance makes
exactly. Yeah, you hear it slapping and all that. It's a nightmare. Not good. So if you really want to do it, then you got to amplify. But then you got to amplify the whole orchestra. Yeah. And you're often dealing with tech people that don't know how to...
Mixing that style is so hard, I know.
You've been there. It's kind of... So, your best bet, if you can, is to control the rhythm section and bring them right back.
And make them part of the orchestra.
And as acoustic as possible. And again, you need confident artists. And luckily... a lot of the hip-hop artists use jazz musicians.
Oh, of course, yeah. So they actually
so it's
can go
actually
there.
Not a problem for them.
It's not like they need this wall of sound.
No,
in order
I mean
to
they can
perform.
do that, and some of them do. Like Kendrick's band was loud and that was the second show he did, and we got away with it because it was when Kendrick Lamar was just becoming really big, and he's like like super huge now, and so but at the time everyone knew who he was. To Me a Butterfly had just come out, and he snuck off in the lunch break and went and had lunch with Obama at the White House. That sort of stuff. And so that show got really loud, but we sort of got away with it, but there was meetings about let's not let that happen again. So, we've done it. And we did Maxwell was the last one. He's like a, R&B kind of smooth artist. And we did him last, and we didn't even put the guitar amp on stage. It was in a box off stage.
Yeah, you can control things
and
better there.
We just had piano.
Yeah,
no keyboards.
Nice.
And upright bassed.
Oh, that's great.
And the drums played stuff. And we still played sort of his things. But again, I did a couple where I really just had him with the orchestra. And then I did, the other, we did, I can probably talk about this now. We did have one concert, I'm just remembering now. This wasn't my fault, where the artist showed up and didn't quite get the idea of what was going to happen. And they walked off stage, and we cancelled 2 sold-out shows with the orchestra.
They just weren't in the zone.
They weren't in the zone for it. They weren't prepared. We tried to warn them. And they wanted to blast tracks and all this sort of stuff, and the orchestra weren't going to have that and everything. And so it was kind of like, you know, everyone survived, you know, to fight another day.
But these things happen.
We learned some lessons on that one. Okay. But, you know, so I guess it can happen that it can go really bad. But then with the next show we did, we sort of redeemed ourselves, which you know, was a big thing.
They must have been a little upset losing all the money from those shows.
Yeah. Not good. Thankfully it was a well-funded orchestra, so no one lost their shirt on it.
No.
But no one was happy with it happening.
I bet
no one wants anything to happen. I mean, we're so privileged to get to do this and write all this music. There'd been a lot of effort gone into it, and then
I'm wondering if the artist didn't realize what kind of audience was actually booking tickets to see this, because it's probably new audience, you know, as who knows.
I don't know, and you know,
you can grab new audience, you know, by changing things up.
Yeah, so. Well, and it's also, you know, interesting doing shows at the Kennedy Center because it's an iconic place in America. I mean, it's in Washington D.C.
Yeah.
It's the sort of the arts. I mean, there's Carnegie Hall, I guess, and in New York, but you know, they do a lot of amazing programs there, and they have the clout to bring in these artists and put on these collaborations. Hopefully, we get back to them soon. You know, at the moment.
Yes, I know.
But it was nice to do the arrangements for Houston, and then I just got a call to do some stuff for Metropole. So they're getting back in.
That's good to hear.
I said no because I was busy doing other things. Because like right now, all of the film world's just gone nuts with getting back in action.
Getting back into post-production.
So we're recording.
Yes.
You know, I've got scores recording in Australia, London, New York, Nashville. I had Berlin 2 weeks ago. You know, like all over the world in the next month. Just everyone's playing catch up.
Catching up. Now. Yes. Yeah.
And that's the other thing, because I know we're running out of time, but you know, historically the arrangers were all orchestrators in film and TV, like in America at least. All your Nelson Riddles and your Neil Heftis and your Irwin Kostels and all those guys, they did sort of my day job as well, which is orchestrating for film and TV. So I would also say, you know, like, because generally arrangers came from the jazz background.
Yep.
I mean, now you do have a lot of them coming from the film background and some pop background. But if you're coming from a jazz background, you know, you should really learn what a real orchestra does and how to write for it, and then how to open a MIDI file, because when someone does call you to orchestrate something or work with them, you've got to be able to do all that. Yeah. And you know, it's back to being able to do a demo. The technology is such a big part these days.
Definitely.
Of everything
you have
do.
to be on top of a lot of stuff when you're delivering to people.
And so I would just say to anyone starting out now, you know, there's no excuse for not knowing how every sequencer works, or at least a handful of them, knowing what sample libraries are out there, and knowing how, you know, film orchestrating works as well, because that's definitely a way to make money. And, you know, it definitely, I mean, it does pay more than arranging, I can tell you that. But I think we have to get back to work.
Yes, we do. But it was really, really good to talk about all this. And I look forward to doing it again sometime, hopefully.
Definitely. All right.
Thanks,
Talk
Tim.
to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.